Vardit, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here at the University of Bonn. You have a very busy schedule, and I'm very happy that you accepted for this keynote today. The Hastings Center is really much, as Professor Honnefelder said, one of the oldest and elderly institutes of that kind. And we learned a lot from the Hastings Center report, but also from other resources of your center. And I know also that it was not so easy for you to come to Bonn due to emotional political circumstances in Tel Aviv. So I very much appreciate that you are here. Thank you for the keynote.
Thank you so much. I am personally honored to be here, and the Hastings Center is very grateful for having this opportunity to share some of our thinking about the future of bioethics. We talked a lot about history, and I hope to shift the tone into the future, as some of our distinguished speakers have done. I also have to acknowledge how excited I am to share the podium with Professor Childress. That I have been using the book for decades, for teaching, for thinking. Congratulations on the translation, and congratulations to the DRZE on this wonderful anniversary. We're talking today about the rediscovery of bioethics, and I want to use some of my time to speak and then some of my time to engage with you in a conversation. A part of what I'll say is that bioethics is a conversation, is an exchange, so I want to implement it in this room. As I'm speaking, I'm inviting each one of you to find one point at least where you disagree with me, where the vision that I'm presenting doesn't sit well with you, and where you'd like to argue back. Again, in the spirit of bioethics being a dialogue, usually across different values, across tension. Which really has been the vision of the Hastings Center from the early days. Some of my points are based on this essay that I wrote a year ago when I became the president of the Hastings Center, laying out a vision as an invitation for discussion. Now, my first year in this wonderful role has ended, and we're about to launch our strategic plan for the next 5 years. So for the past year, I've been having conversations about this essay with colleagues in the United States and all over the world. And I want to share with you the points I'm making here, but also some of those conversations, because not everybody buys this vision. Not everybody agrees with it. Rediscovering bioethics, why now? I think at the highest level, bioethics historically has focused on the individual level, on issues of autonomy, and we're shifting our attention towards the collective level, towards issues of the common good, but also because we're facing a new world in some ways. Things are changing, and the issues that we're addressing are shifting. Anything from persisting inequities, deepening inequities, especially globally, the recognition that structural injustices have an impact on health and human well-being, even more than what happens once we're inside the healthcare system. Climate change was mentioned, the impact of climate change on health, on migration patterns, and other existential risks we're facing, threats to democracy, the epidemic of misinformation, the collapse of trust in science and health, and how AI is now sweeping over us like a big wave, changing everything we do, from the delivery of care to how we publish, and even causing us to think what it means to be human. What is it that we do that it cannot do, and hopefully will never be able to do? So on the backdrop of all these challenges, I have been proposing this expansive vision saying bioethics can and should reposition itself to address all of these problems. And many in our field and outside of it don't agree with this vision. So let me start by problematizing this vision. Some have been telling me that what I say poses a risk of dilution to our expertise and our effectiveness. That if we try to do everything, be too much for everybody, we will lose our standing. I've been told we should stick to what we have done historically and what we know that we do well. Things like patient care, healthcare delivery, addressing the challenges of emerging biotechnologies, and of course, protecting participants in biomedical research. Those issues in and of themselves are broad and deep, and to this day, extremely challenging. So people have been telling me, what are you doing by trying to convince people, by the Hastings Center positioning itself to call on the bioethics community to go broader? You are actually reducing our effectiveness. In a way, saying that this vision is almost dangerous for the future of bioethics as a field. Recently, a right-wing conservative platform in the US published a paper that criticizes my essay, and the title is, "Bioethicists Want to Rule the World." And this critical piece says they're using biomedicine as a ruse to tell all of us what we should do about almost any policy issue. Who are they? What is their expertise? What knowledge do they have about ethics that we don't as the general public? They are a danger to society. So presenting this vision may seem well-intentioned, innocent, but some people weaponize this and see this as a potential risk to society posed by bioethics, which takes me back to the original comments Professor Lanzerath made today about how bioethics was seen decades ago as having a political agenda and being a potential danger to society. But I stand my ground, and I want to argue that we need to expand our vision going forward. We need to reinvigorate how expansively we think about bioethics, and I even want to argue that that's not original, that that's not novel, that in fact it brings back to life some of the notions that we had in the earlier days of bioethics. So for example, Dan Callahan, one of the co-founders of the Hastings Center, always talked about the common good. That was the focus of his scholarship. Potter, who coined the term bioethics, talked about a global bioethics and an ecological bioethics. For him, planetary health was the reason that we needed bioethics. It's not some new thought that we have. And Hans Jonas, of course, talking about the responsibility for the whole of nature and for future generations. So I am selling you this vision not as something that myself or the Hastings Center is coming up with, but rather as, in a way, going back to our origins, pre the biomedical focus on individual patients and individual research participants, a vision that really looked at the planet, at the collective level, in order to ask what is our responsibility in all of this? Not just what are our rights, but what is our responsibility? Why are we rediscovering bioethics now? Because we want to explore what the future holds for bioethics if it continues its evolution to become a field that embraces systemic collective level challenges, that has a global scale and focus, that emphasizes human flourishing, beyond human health and that seeks to have increased societal impact. And again, I offer this vision not because I'm convinced that every point here is exactly right, but because I want to invite a conversation within bioethics and beyond about this vision. I want to discuss 5 points. I'll try to illustrate each of them, and I'm reminding you to think whether you agree with all of them, with some of them, and try to pinpoint our disagreements in order to have an interesting conversation. I want to talk about the transition from individual to collective level issues, from local to global, from human health to flourishing, from scholarship to impact, from a field to a hub. And I want to emphasize is that when I say from to, I don't mean that we're abandoning where we're coming from. We're continuing to do that, and we're trying to go beyond to the next stage. From individual to collective level issues, we have started this transition at least 20 years ago when public health ethics became a more established field within bioethics. And let's remember that we're emerging from a global pandemic that showed us that collective level issues are at the heart of what we do. In a way, it was a dramatic wake-up call for our field because the need for public health ethics principles was needed to cope with tensions that played out every day that touched each one of us and our communities, and it was in the media on the evening news. I have never heard the word ethics mentioned as much as, at least in North America during the pandemic, when we talked about tensions between individual freedoms and the common good in terms of lockdowns, in terms of school closures, vaccine mandates. These played out differently in different jurisdictions based on cultural values, but the entire world was caught in this tension between my freedom, the American version of it, which means my responsibility to care for others is quite limited, to the common good that had real impact on what we could do to the point of not leaving our house. So it really brought public health ethics and the reflection about the common good to the front of our thinking, of our scholarship, and even of public interest. We also saw that our theories of justice and resource allocation frameworks need further development because we had to cope with triage protocols. Do you remember the early days? Not enough ventilators, not enough equipment. Who gets treated? Who might die because they don't have access? This required bioethical contribution at the level of theories of resource allocation. We then established national vaccination priorities. Remember, first the elderly, then disabled people, then the younger people. And the debate, the global debate regarding national hoarding of vaccines and when do they go to other countries that might need them more. These are all examples of common level issues that bioethics is definitely moving towards. And I think now with global climate change and the global implementation of AI, we will need to lean into this kind of thinking much more. So we need to acknowledge cultural and societal contexts. Our conceptual tools for addressing issues of justice, fairness, and equity, I argue, are still underdeveloped and need to become much more sophisticated. And many existential threats that we will face in the coming years will require applying theories of justice at a global and intergenerational way. So I think our work is cut out for us conceptually and in terms of the impact on policies at that level. A word about from local to global, and again, not because we should abandon the local work, but when I think about the challenges coming our way, how can we address them without thinking globally? The pandemic and potentially future pandemics give us a new epidemiological meaning to the notion of the global village. Viruses don't recognize borders. Remember the mantra of nobody's safe until everybody's safe from the WHO. So we really live in a global world, interconnected world, and indeed the integration of AI, which is top of mind for everybody today, obviously has to be done at the global level, and therefore regulation needs to be global. So I think we need normative concepts of global justice, equity, solidarity, a concept that is much more advanced in Europe than in the United States, and recognize what all humans owe each other. And I think we even need to move beyond the focus on the values of individuals and cultures to those that undergird a truly global bioethics, which means taking diversity seriously. And here I want to share with you the trials and tribulations of the past year, because back in June, the International Association of Bioethics hosted its biannual World Congress of Bioethics, the biggest meeting of bioethicists in the world. And the choice of location happened when I was the president of the association several years prior. And I personally and the association, we found ourselves under fire because of that choice. And that generated an entire debate in the literature. I was going to say fight, but let's call it debate, in the bioethics literature with multiple papers answering each other in conversation about what it meant to host a bioethics conference in that country, including a Target article in the American Journal of Bioethics that invited, I think, dozens of people wrote responses to it. They published maybe 15. There was media coverage of this. What was the choice? Maybe some of you ended up attending. Maybe some of you boycotted it. There was a call to boycott it. The choice of country was Qatar. And the criticism was, how can a bioethics conference be hosted in a country that is known for severe issues in respect for human rights, in freedoms, in the status of women, of migrant worker, of LGBTQ individuals and communities? What is the message you're sending when you're allowing bioethics to go there? And the response of the association and many other renowned colleagues who wrote in support of this was, well, if we only talk to ourselves, if we stay in the areas, in the zones where we're comfortable culturally, in what way are we global? In what way are we international or diverse? True diversity means being in an uncomfortable place, where the tensions between values are real and they play out at the level of personal safety and real policy challenges. We need to go to those places, talk about religion, talk about culture, explore how we can engage really outside of our comfort zone. Not everybody accepted that. The previous World Congress of Bioethics was hosted in Basel. And I thought to myself, well, if we always stay in places as neutral as Switzerland, what does it mean to say that we're willing to engage with diversity? The jury's out on this. The conference happened. It was successful in the sense that hundreds of people attended. And it was the most diverse conference in the history of the International Association in terms of who attended and what kinds of topics were addressed. So I leave this as a point for reflection. When we talk about global bioethics, what does that mean pragmatically, and how we address these challenges? From human health to human flourishing, and here again I get a lot of criticism. Bioethics cannot be the field that worries about every aspect of being human. We're not about well-being, we're about health. But I think we need to move beyond that focus on health and set the more ambitious goal of exploring the conditions for human flourishing. And here's my thought experiment. When you think about issues such as poverty, racism, war, global warming, the terrible challenges of misinformation, and even threats to democracy, do you think about them as bioethical issues? The answer is not simple and it's not easy. Each one of these has direct implications to health. It has indirect implications to the societies and the systems that we live in that in turn impact health. But do we want bioethics, I'll exaggerate, to start when you walk through the doors of a hospital with a heart condition? And we ask, are we going to pay for your heart surgery? Should we control the pricing of drugs that you should take? Or do we want to step back and say, what got you into the hospital? Where were you born? What were the social determinants of health that got you to be healthy or sick at the age of 75? How should we think societally about where we invest our resources? Communities, prevention, public health, or the heroic interventions at the end of life? We know that health budgets go to the very end of life today. We know that in the United States, the single most important determinant of life expectancy is your zip code. Geographically, where you were born determines more than any other individual factor how long you will live. So how can we think about bioethics in terms of biomedicine and not in terms of what are the barriers? Anything from urban planning to the health of communities to our risks at home, all of those factors determine how healthy we will be and how long we will live. And therefore, I argue we have to look at human flourishing and not just human health. So a more ambitious bioethics should focus on removing barriers to flourishing and building societies that promote it, and this would enhance our capacity to address existential risks. From scholarship to impact is one of my more controversial points, and I've heard a lot of criticism on this. When I look at the history of bioethics, I feel very proud. We produced a superb scholarship and literary canon, and again, Professor Childress is one of the building blocks of this important literature. We built a rich and nuanced knowledge base, both conceptual and empirical. We use this expertise to contribute to decision-making, and we do engage regularly with the media and make genuine efforts to be more accessible to the general public. But at the end of the day, mainstream bioethics as a field of scholarship of expertise resides within the academia. And those of you who are professors or heads of centers, think about the advice that you give young bioethicists. Do you encourage them, first and foremost, to write a peer-reviewed paper for the New England Journal of Medicine, or to write an op-ed for your #1 national newspaper that hundreds of thousands will read, including decision makers? When we think about our careers, we think as academics, and our impact on policy, on public discourse is recognized, it's important, but it's not core to careers and sometimes even to the way we see our mission. The Nuffield Council recently released its strategic plan, and they talk about ethics in policy, how to impact policy thinking and policy making. That's fresh. Recognizing that as the core of your mission as a bioethics influential global institute is, to me, the future and a very important message. So let's remember that impact can mean various things. Policy development, but also implementation of our recommendations. The Hastings Center is known for issuing normative recommendations based on a lot of research and thinking. Are they implemented? Are they, we're known, our end-of-life guidelines are implemented in hospitals around the US and the world. That's impact, but what about other recommendations? Public engagement and education through mainstream and social media. How many of us engage with the public, with educators, with journalists, with decision makers as much as we engage with each other in rooms like that. I call on all of us to make that a core aspect of our work and our mission. I would like impact to be a consideration when we train the younger generation of bioethicists, even when we formulate our research questions. Some of our work is always conceptual, and thought experiments and speculatory, anticipatory work is important. But I invite each one of us, when we prioritize how to invest our intellectual energy, to ask ourselves, if my research is funded and it's successful and it's published in the best journals, what impact will it have on the world? And prioritize our questions based on that. The way we write our grant proposals, the way we evaluate our achievements. Going forward, I'd like us to design our field to meet the challenges of impact, however you understand it. And finally, from a field to a hub. A lot of writing recently uses the metaphor of bioethics in the life cycle. I'll read to you in a minute a paper that came out 2 weeks ago that says that bioethics is emerging from its infancy and it's now an adolescent. I have 2 adolescents at home. I would like to argue that we are a young adult. But there's a lot of use of this metaphor to kind of tell us where we are and how much we have evolved. When were we born? Anywhere from the Nuremberg Code to 1969, when the Hastings Center was founded. But we've been around for decades. We're definitely not infants. I don't think we're adolescents. I think even if, when I entered the US at the border, they asked me, what do you do? And if I say I'm a bioethicist, I get a blank stare and I need to explain. But even if people don't know the term, they're aware of our work and of some of our key achievements. I think we've shaped cultural norms, we've modified terminology, and definitely legislation and policy. I think we're a field, a recognized field. We have our journals and conferences and centers and even many master's programs and PhDs. But I think it's time to move beyond bioethics as a field and think of ourselves as a hub. And that reflects many of the comments that were given today as in the introductions. When I think of bioethics as an island, I think we spent the first 50 to 70 years mapping the island, and now we want to build the bridges that connect us to all sorts of mainlands. We ourselves are interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, but I'd like to see us expanding our scope to include more players. And these other players don't necessarily have to be seen or define themselves as bioethicists. They can still be philosophers and oncologists and whatever they do for their day job. But I would like bioethics to have a convening power to bring in multiple players for a societal conversation. And I think we're recognized enough to use this convening power and become a global hub for thinking and activity. So these are the 5 points that I hope triggered your thinking in some way. And I want to finish by quoting from a paper that was published in the journal Bioethics, the journal of the International Association of Bioethics, literally a couple of weeks ago. And the tagline of it is, "Arresting Bioethics Inward Turn." The author, a PhD student, fresh, says, look, a lot of people in our field think that if we become, I'm quoting, overly expansive, we create a discipline that lacks rigor. We create a space for shoddy scholarship that renders the entire notion of a bioethicist meaningless in practice. Back to this dilution problem. But the entire paper argues, in a way, in favor of my vision. Surprise, surprise that I chose to finish with it. And he says in the conclusion the following powerful words. Bioethics has begun to exit its infancy and to enter its adolescence, and it finds itself an exception, one of the lone only spaces for interdisciplinary scholarship in an academy defined by silos. Some wish to shrink away from this burden of being the only field. He's exaggerating a little bit, but young people exaggerate. Bioethics is the only field where we have interdisciplinarity. So some people want to collapse bioethics inward so that bioethicists can better coalesce, convene around clear parameters, clear methodologies, standards of rigor. If this collapse does not occur, they warn us, bioethics will lose the respect of the academy. Our growth will be slowed down, funding will go elsewhere, students will stop coming. And these are exactly the messages that I heard regarding my vision. But here's his ending. But what if bioethics has thrived historically precisely because it is different? And what if by holding on to this vision, bioethics becomes a model of resistance, a vision of a de-siloed university that administrators declare they value, but continuously fail to produce? So I don't know if we're the only interdisciplinary field, and I don't know if the threat is really that we will lose all of our effectiveness. That's a bit of an extreme description. But my argument to you today is that our future has to be expansive, global, inclusive, and even recognize fuzzy boundaries. It's not bioethics or not. It can be the bridge that bioethics is building outward. And now I would like to invite a conversation. Thank you very much.
So we have still a couple of minutes, so we could, you could raise the one or the other comment or questions. Thank you so much, Vardit. A bouquet of flowers, of very inspiring thoughts, and I'm rather sure that we will take them also to the discussion after the coffee break. Aurélie.
Thank you very much for this inspiring vision. I was just curious, if we follow this broad conceptualization of bioethics, then this may be, I don't know, maybe this question confuses you, but what is left of ethics in this narrow understanding of ethics? I mean, what are those people doing that are not defining themselves as bioethicists? Because I was thinking, well, wouldn't the answer be, well, it's a division of labor, and you as an ethicist are the specialist in justice theories, I'm just working on this health issue, and let's work together. And this would be the old style. And what is then the new style? Is the ethicist becoming a bioethicist, or does he do something else?
Great. I haven't discussed this anywhere without getting this question and the term division of labor. And I won't take a cheap shot and say, oh, back to the siloed vision of academia where we all have our tasks and our subject matter. I acknowledge that you're right. And I do not wish to collapse bioethics into, ethics into bioethics. No, that's not my goal. But if you notice throughout my presentation, there was at least an indirect or trickle-down effect on human health. So when we talk about climate change, impact on health and flourishing. When we talk about threats to democracy, it's the threat to people trusting in science and health, and the threat of losing faith in our institutions so that we can vaccinate people. So I think that we have a special lens that has a connection to human health in a very broad, think about the WHO definition of health. It has been criticized as being too broad. I welcome it. So I think we're still about human health. We're still about biomedicine, but we should be willing to acknowledge Again, that does not limit us to the healthcare system and biomedical research. It's just a broader understanding of the impact that this has. But still I don't want to cut loose the chain to human health. I just want to get more perspective. And I think people who do ethics in political theory, ethics in journalism, ethics of war, will still have their work cut out for them.
So as a biologist, this bioethics debate is quite... This bioethics aspect, as you presented it, is quite human-centered. So I'm wondering where nature is at this point. But that's not my main issue. My main issue is the following. You know, as far as I understand, you place bioethics somehow as the glue to all other disciplines, which somehow incorporates the different disciplines to a certain goal. So what I'd like to say is that isn't it more the questions that need to be tackled through an interdisciplinary approach, and bioethics is one of the fields that you need for that. But it's also expertise, in the sciences which you need to tackle a problem. It's expertise in the social sciences and so. And bioethics is just one of the disciplines, as opposed to, the discipline that merges everything to every problem.
Absolutely. I'll say a word about your first point. I do consider planetary health that Dirk opened with as a key element of this broadening. I just couldn't include everything. There are many key concepts that I wish I could put on the screen, but I'm with you. I'm in your camp. But regarding bioethics as the glue, and you use the term lubricant, which I really enjoyed, because when we think about interdisciplinary deep work, it's not easy. We don't speak each other's languages. We need a lot of translation, a lot of open-mindedness, a lot of patience, and a lot of trust. So it's really hard work that needs all the gluing or lubrication that you can find, in terms of what the daily work requires. I never thought and never spoke of bioethics as a discipline, because I acknowledge we don't have a methodology, a conceptual approach. We have lots. So I think bioethics in and of itself already has all these players around the table. And I think the glue is the questions, the issues, the problems, the challenges. We come at them from different directions, and what unites us is that we all care about the same problems, and we all have this passion for making the world better around these challenges. So I don't see a big tension. Let me give you a quick example. I've been working for 15 years now on a new technology of prenatal testing, cell-free fetal DNA. And when we started putting together the project, I realized that I know just a sliver of what I need to tackle this problem. I needed the geneticists, the genetic counselors, the economists for the impact on the healthcare system. I needed the psychologists and the anthropologists because different communities had different cultural values. I needed to create a very rich table just to do my little project. There's no way that I could have this expertise as a single bioethicist. So again, I agree with everything you said. We're united around a problem, and we need to bring as many relevant voices to the conversation as possible. That's what makes us unique or distinct, and that's what gives us the opportunity to have the impact that we have.
Julia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Vardit, for a fascinating lecture. I wanted to raise two issues with you. One is you identified the problem of people talking about their own autonomy, of living in an area where you do not consider a responsibility to society. And we've got that with vaccines at the moment and vaccine denial. And bioethics, or medical ethics at least, was always about individuals. And we're moving away from that to look at bioethics as a much more general sense. Coming from South Africa, where we talk about Ubuntu a lot, which is the communitarian concept, we need to think about that in relation to many of the aspects of biomedicine, as well as other aspects of bioethics, as Professor Onnefelder indicated, for things like mammals, plants, and so on. So autonomy as a concept has to be rethought, and particularly the United States, but Europe as well, has stressed it too much, in my view. So that was one issue. Another is that a lot of the bioethics that we look at is top-down. It is the issue of us identifying that the physician makes the decisions, don't do harm, and so on. So it's, again, the question of responsibility of the individual, every individual, not just the person doing the work. Thank you very much for what you said.
Thank you, Julian. Unsurprisingly, because we go back more than 20 years, I agree with both your points. But I want to use this opportunity to say I think we made important progress around autonomy. We made the concept more sophisticated. We talk about relational autonomy. We talk about the individual being embedded in communitarian context. So I think the way we talk about autonomy has evolved. But overall, you're right. The concept within bioethics needs to be put in its place and speak with other concepts. And what happened in the United States during the pandemic was a cautionary tale. If you interpret freedom in this way, you can't include appropriately notions of responsibility and common good. And it played out in ways that killed people. So I agree with you. And Ubuntu is indeed a wonderful concept that, we talk about a global bioethics. We need to include concepts from other cultures and other regions. The top-down approach is a wonderful opening for me to say a word about the notion of expertise. As I said, we're sometimes criticized as not really being experts of anything. If you can do all of these things about all these topics with all those disciplines, you actually know nothing. And I think the concept of expertise is evolving beyond the academia, because today when we talk about a consultation with stakeholders, we include people with lived experiences as experts of their lived experience. People with disabilities, advocates for a certain disease, people who live in certain regions under dire circumstances, they bring an expertise into the conversation that is not top-down and that must be included and considered. So I think on autonomy and on expertise, we're evolving in the right direction, in a good direction, but we need to stay on track.
To stay in time, I think we have to move all the other comments and questions to the debate after the coffee break, and I think we need this coffee break, every one of us. Vardit, thank you so much for your lecture.